saw the title, folks. Welcome to the channel Rockin' the Country. Hank Williams said it best. And Guy Clark is the real deal country artist. He's a treat anytime. I don't always know what I'm going to get from him, but I know it's going to be good, it's going to be real, and it's going to be country. And Saremile, who's down in Texas herself, made a gift to the channel for me to do this reaction. So, Saremile, thank you for this. I always smile when I see your name. Just on the channel. You've been interacting on the channel and involved with the channel for like a number of years, and I just have very fond memories of these years here, and certain people just make me smile. You're one of them, so thank you for that. So let's see what Hank Williams said best. And I'm surprised with a title like this that I haven't done this one before, but here we go. Oh, I didn't expect that beginning. I told you I never know what I'm getting from Guy. But it's going to be good.
One man's hawk is another man's dove. One man's hug is another man's shove. One man's rock is another man's sand. And one man's fist is another man's hand. Well, one man's tool is another man's toy, and one man's grief is another man's joy. One man's squawk is another man's sang, and one man's crutch is another man's wang.
Jeez, what got left on the cutting room floor?
One man's pride is another man's humble. One man's step is another man's stumble. One man's pleasure is another man's pain, and one man's loss is another man's gain. One man's can is another man's grail. One man's anchor is another man's sail. One man's right is another man's wrong, and one man's curse is another man's song. For every father's daughter, hey, for every mother's son, the only thing the same is that it ain't for anyone. Hank Williams said it best, he said it a long time ago. Unless you have made no mistakes in your life, be careful of stones that you throw.
Yep, I did a reaction to that. That's why I don't judge until I know a lot more about anything.
Now one man's deuce is another man's ace. One man's back is another man's face. One man's reason is another man's rhyme. One man's dollar is another man's dime. Now one man's tree is another man's post. One man's angel is another man's ghost. One man's rain is another man's drought. One man's hope is another man's doubt. Now one man's fault is another man's fair. One man's tooth is another man's hair. One man's hand is another man's stub. One man's feast is another man's grub. One man's dread is another man's dream. One man's sigh is another man's scream. One man's water is another man's wine. One man's daughter leave another man crying.
You gotta admire. How does he even remember them all? Yeah, he wrote it. Yeah, you practice it. Doesn't mean you're gonna remember it all. Like, what is it? REM song Orange Crush? And like, I could be reading the lyrics. Granted, it's a fast song, so the dynamic is different. But even then, like only once in a while can I ever get all the lyrics right while I'm reading them. How Guy? I mean, this is like George Carlin. This is like the equivalent of a George Carlin stand-up, where George just peels through this litany of items, and you're like, how in God's name did he remember all of that? How did Guy remember all of this? There are so many contrasts, but I don't want to lose this thought. I did a video somewhere, I think. I don't think I wrote it in one of my books. Maybe I alluded to it, but there's a difference in life between absolutes and relatives. Those things that are relative to other things, and other things that are absolute in their own right. If you got $10 in your bank account, that's just an absolute. I got $10 in my bank account. Now, relative to somebody else, they may have $10 in their bank account. They may consider that nothing. They may consider it everything. If pro athletes will do this. Oh, you made $2 million this year? And I only got $1.5 million? I deserve more. And it's like, well, you got $1.5 million. That's an absolute number. Now, if this other person had $1 million contract versus a $2 million contract, you wouldn't have a problem. You start to compare yourself to other people. And that's where we can get into trouble, where if we dial it back and say, all right, do I have what I would be happy with in a vacuum, with nobody else, no other information about other people? And that's along the lines of what's happening here. But there's more to what he's saying.
For every father's daughter, for every mother's son, the only thing the same is that it ain't for anyone. Hank Williams said it best, he said it a long time ago. Unless you have made no mistakes in your life, be careful of stones that you throw.
There's such a big chasm of experience between all of us. Pretty.
Now one man's famine is another man's feast. One man's pet is another man's beast. One man's bat is another man's ball, and one man's art is another man's scrawl.
Bat and ball, I don't get.
One man's friend is another man's foe, and one man's Joseph is another man's Joe. One man's hammer is another man's nail, and one man's freedom is another man's jail. One man's road is another man's rut. One man's if is another man's butt. One man's treasure is another man's trash. And one man's landing is another man's crash. One man's word, another man's lie. One man's dirt, another man's sky. One man's skin is another man's color. One man's killer is another man's brother. For every father's daughter, for every mother's son, the only thing the same is that it ain't for anyone. Hank Williams said it best, he said it a long time ago. Unless you have made no mistakes in your life, be careful of stones that you throw.
Doesn't even say don't
said it best, he said it a long time ago. Unless you have made no mistakes in your life, careful of stones that you throw.
And that expression doesn't even say don't throw the stones. It says just be careful of them. Because we need to make judgments in this life. We make them all the time. And one of the things that's happening in contemporary culture is that judgment is thrown out the window, because anytime somebody makes a judgment, it's viewed as prejudiced or biased or something of that nature. But no, you got to hear the reasons behind it. And in a song like this, there's a big chasm between the items, shall we say. They weren't all opposites that he mentioned, but he said it's about perspective. The way one man perceives one thing is going to be different than the way another person perceives that very same thing. And we all lead very different lives. And until you understand the organic elements as to why somebody thinks a certain way, lives a certain way, does a certain thing, views a certain thing a certain way, then don't judge them. Why somebody acts a certain way on occasion. Like, you got to get to know things. That's one thing I like about courts of law, where defense and prosecution, they present these diametrically opposed viewpoints. And but somewhere in there, you could ferret out the details and see how things work. And that's what you need. You try to understand the context of everything as to why something happened the way it did. And my God, was there a lot in this. I don't know how long it took the lyricist to write this song. I don't know if it was Guy, and maybe you know that, Saremile. I'm not sure, but that was radically different, and that's like this kind of song right there. You could construct a semester-long philosophy class around it, because each one of those things, even just setting it in the context of absolutes versus relatives, those things that are relative to another, is, at least 2 classes worth of discussion. There's so much material there. But once you get into the specifics here, then you're getting into psychology. some more so than others. The one man's bat is another man's ball. Now that I don't get. But one man's if is another man's but. And that's an interesting one. That right there would take you in all kinds of places in a philosophy class where you're discussing ideas and possible meanings, probable meanings, different ways of viewing things. And that's one thing I loved about having been a philosophy major is that the professor would ask a question, what makes something right? And then we'd offer different answers, and then you'd hear what like Socrates had to say, and you'd be like, wow, he really covered it. He covered it all. And then you hear someone else's perspective. Thrasymachus would say something entirely different, and you're like, well, that makes sense too. And then you realize that like there's a lot more to understand about a situation, a thought, an idea than the immediate quick twitch response in our brain, what Kahneman would call system 1. You go into system 2, which is more deliberate, slower moving, ideation and conceptualizing things. And it helps so much in relationships with other people that you just instinctively keep a step back from judging another. One thing though, this is my bugaboo, is mean-spiritedness. Because you could spot that in a heartbeat. In the same way you could spot generosity. They're opposites in ways. But mean-spiritedness I don't do well. There's certain things you can look at and just say prima facie, on their face, they're wrong. On their face, they're right. What have you. And, we consider these truths to be self-evident. Well, some things are other evident, and behavior can be one of them. But when you hear, like I did a reaction in the Creed Fisher song just before this one, where he went to a hotel room, knocked on the door, and don't make me feel at home. And that's what he told the woman as he slipped his ring off, and he was going to sleep with this other woman, obviously outside his marriage. And he didn't want. She offered him a drink, and he's like, I think that's what it was. He was like, don't make me feel at home, because what's at home is horrible. It's cold. It's quiet. The woman that's there really isn't there. And it's just cold. It's only stone and wood. That's what my home is. It's really just a house. It's a structure, but there's no love there. I don't want to feel that way. I want to feel alive, good, loved, safe, passionate, all that. But if you were to just hear, yeah, this guy went to a room and slept with another woman, you'd be like, just another guy, greaseball, stepping out and hurting his wife. Until you hear more of the context. You may still disagree with what he did or how he handled it, but at least you'd understand more of the context to where it would be they call them mitigating factors, or things that might lessen the harshness with which you view a given action or a given person. It's hard enough getting through this life. And Jesus, Saremile, look what you've done to me. All right, I'm going to stop with the commentary on this because this absolutely is in my wheelhouse. I love this stuff. I love pondering it and talking about it. But I'm going to give a rating to this. And the number that popped into my head was a 9.3. And it was on the sheer amount of work that the lyricist put in to coming up with these contrasts or these opposites or these differing perspectives that are related to one another. And, but tying it in, just don't judge people too harshly. Don't throw too many stones, because you never know what end of the rope, the stone, the criticism you're going to fall on. And somebody could find something to criticize you about, same as they can me. There's lots of material there. So, all right, guys, 9.3 courtesy of Saremile. Oh, and the other part of it was that guy remembered the lyrics. I don't know if he had to do retakes on this or if the editing was superb in this thing, and I also like the guitar picking. And it had a Western feel to it. There were two guitars in this. One of them felt Western, and the other just felt straight country. So, all right, guys, hope you enjoyed that. Have a great day. See you on another video. Keep rocking the country.